Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to our class here on paraphrasing. My name is Elliot. I am the IELTS expert at Magoosh. And so today, for all of you out there, most of the students here today are Magoosh students. So welcome to all of you joining me on Zoom. And we also have something we've been doing recently. We're letting all of you out there on YouTube join in as well and just view the classes. We're going to have a few opportunities for asking some questions in the chat in particular. And students, the Magoosh students on Zoom will be able to, you can use the chat to ask questions throughout. I'm going to do my best to monitor your questions and have some time to respond to things. All of you out there on YouTube, go ahead and put your questions in the chat if you have them. I may or may not, depending on how many things come through, may or may not be able to answer all of them. But you'll at least be able to follow along here and see what folks are doing here in Magoosh, where we're offering these live classes to our students now. There's something new we've rolled out since July and the beginning of July, and we're really excited about it here. And I am, as a teacher, I'm excited to be able to do this. Usually at Magoosh, I create videos that students watch when they sign up for our program. And this has been an exciting opportunity for me to get to work with students in a live way. So that's been really great. So welcome to all of you. I do, for all of you on the Zoom call, my Magoosh students, please make sure you keep yourselves on mute throughout the lesson here. If you have comments or questions, please use the chat instead of unmuting yourself. That works better for us. I also need to say that so that students can watch these lessons later, I'm going to be recording. So recording has started, and that way I can share it later. You all in Magoosh see on your dashboard the class schedule that's coming up. You can also, I'm going to put a link to this recording there. So if you want to see later, you can check them out. All right, so let's get started here. Our topic for today is one that has been widely requested by students for the last couple of weeks, and I'm excited to talk about it here today. We're going to be talking about paraphrasing, and this is something that is really important for the IELTS exam. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's also an important skill for language development. And so this is not just something that IELTS likes to test because they want to be difficult. They're testing paraphrasing because it's really a genuine demonstration of your language skill. So we're going to look a little bit about, I'm going to provide some advice to all of you about how things you can look at when you are thinking about paraphrasing and how to sort of use a variety of approaches to paraphrasing language. And hopefully this is something you can take from today. And then as you are practicing IELTS questions, especially IELTS speaking and IELTS writing questions, these are some approaches you can begin practicing to try to develop your skills more and more as you're going. Okay, so paraphrasing requires some complicated grammar and not complicated, but a wide variety of vocabulary skills. These are not things that we can really build in a quick way in a 1 hour, 15-minute session here today. We can't cover all of the grammar and vocabulary topics you'll need, but we can focus on some approaches that work. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on here today. Okay, so again, welcome to all of you who have joined. Just a quick reminder, I will be asking for you to take a few opportunities to practice some of the things we're talking about in this lesson. So at any point when you have questions or if you have responses you want to provide for the practice opportunity here, please use the chat feature. And all of you out there on YouTube, you can put your comments in there as well. And if I have time, I need to prioritize the questions of the Magoosh students here in Zoom. But if there's time and if I can get to it, I will take a look at those comments and questions as well. Okay. All right. So let's dive in. Let's get into this here. All right. First of all, let's define paraphrasing in case it's something that's. So paraphrasing is basically expressing the meaning of a written or spoken idea using different words than the original language of the writer or speaker. Okay, so this is something that is a skill that is highly valuable in academic work when you're writing papers for classes in college or graduate school. You often need to take ideas from another person. And, one option is sometimes to quote their language, right? But if you're not quoting someone, then what you need to do in an academic research paper would be to take that language of someone else and put it into your own words. You would, of course, give credit to the person whose ideas you're talking about. You would cite your sources, but you would need to put your language into your own. You would need to put the language into your own words, and the goal would be to sort of make it simpler or clarify the ideas that are there. Oh, I see someone writing on there. If you could avoid writing on the screen, that would be great, please. We can all see the writing there, so please avoid writing on the screen if you're following along. Thanks, but no big deal. I like those squiggles there. They add some color to the screen. Thanks. Okay. Anyway, so it's an academic skill. Okay, but IELTS has some particular uses for this. Okay, and I want to call that out here. Why are we focusing on this? Well, all of you here, I assume, are interested in this because it's a really important IELTS skill. So here's what IELTS focuses on largely, that first bullet point down below. They want to see that you have the ability to paraphrase, especially in IELTS speaking and writing, because that is it's a really clear indication of your ability to use grammar flexibly and your ability to use vocabulary in a wide variety of vocabulary. So a main place that IELTS looks for this is when you are taking language from a question, like an IELTS speaking question. They might ask you a question, and then they want to hear that you are not simply repeating the exact same language from the question that they just asked you, but you have enough grammar and vocabulary to reformulate the question in your response, and you don't recycle all of the language. That's tough during the speaking section because you have to think quickly, right? You're in an interview setting where you don't have a lot of time to think. So it is a difficult thing to do, especially in speaking. But this also applies to writing. When you have task 1 and task 2 prompts, there's a lot of language there. Where they are explaining the topic and what they want you to respond to in your writing. And to the greatest extent possible, it's important to try not to recycle words and phrases from the question itself. Okay. Now, some things are really difficult to replace, some key words that are in there, but there will always be opportunities to mix around at least some of the language that's there so that you can show you are able to paraphrase some of the ideas well. Okay, so that is, those first initial responses when you are responding to speaking and writing questions where you might be tempted to kind of recycle a lot of the language from the question itself, IELTS graders are looking for that and your ability to mix things up and use your own words as you're responding. Okay, so that is a focus. And if you are not able to do that well, it will impact your score. Okay, now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we don't need to spend too much time on the second and third bullet points there. Paraphrasing is, it's not a coincidence that they are testing this. Paraphrasing well does require strong grammar skills and a wide vocabulary. Okay, so it is a good assessment of your language ability to focus on paraphrasing. That's why IELTS chooses to do it. So there are no real shortcuts. If your grammar and your vocabulary are not strong, it's going to be harder for you to paraphrase really, really, really well. Okay, so the solution there, if you believe your grammar and writing skills need work, then you're going to have to continue to work on those things. And working on them is one way you can improve your paraphrasing ability. Okay. The third point there, your ability to recognize paraphrases, the sort of passive recognition of paraphrasing is really the core, one of the core skills of the IELTS reading and listening tests. Now here, this is very much about vocabulary knowledge, right? So your ability to recognize a similar idea in a question prompt as was stated in either the listening or the reading passage. So we're not going to focus on, so paraphrasing there is really recognition, and that's a separate kind of issue than what we're talking about today. What I want to focus on today is, especially for the speaking and writing sections, what are some approaches you can take to show off the vocabulary and grammar skills that you possess so that you can paraphrase really, really well. Okay, so that's going to be our focus here today, and that's what I want to jump into. All right, so let's not do it. Here's our format for today. I've got 5 approaches that I want to present to you today. And for each approach, I'm going to explain it just a little bit. I think the concepts that I'm going to show are not extremely complicated. You should be able to grasp them pretty quickly. I'm going to give you an example, at least one example of each of these things where it's applied, where the approach is applied. And then I'm going to give everybody watching here an opportunity to practice this. And if you've got a sample response you want to put in the chat, you can do that, and we'll take a look at some of these. So get ready, because I want all of you to participate here as we're working on each of these. Okay, so let's start with approach number 1. Approach number 1, word replacement. This is probably the most common way that students approach paraphrasing. And it is a good way, but it is also, I'm going to say, probably the most basic way. Okay, and so if this is the only thing you are doing to paraphrase, then that's good. We're going to take a look at it here, but then you're going to want to focus on some of the other approaches that we get to later in the lesson to mix up your strategies just a little bit. Okay, so approach number 1 is word replacement. What we're thinking about here is taking words from either the speaking question or the writing question and simply finding suitable synonyms, replacement words or phrases that allow you to express the same idea. Okay, so here we're hopefully focusing on key words, the ideas that are important from the question, and then hopefully you can think of something that where you don't have to recycle that exact language, and you can just replace that word in your response. Okay, so that's a simple I bet all of you watching this are familiar with this idea, and maybe this is an approach that you are also taking. So let's take a look. Here's a sample IELTS speaking question. And by the way, this sample question for all of you out there, for my Magoosh students here on the Zoom call, this is one we talked about in Conversation Club yesterday. Conversation Club is another class format we have for all of you who are not familiar, in which students can come and practice IELTS speaking questions with a partner. And then we come all back together as a group and talk about them and I give some feedback on some sample responses. So this is a question that we talked about yesterday in Conversation Club. If you're a Magoosh student watching and you haven't been to Conversation Club, please come and check it out. It's a useful place to practice these paraphrasing skills that we're talking about here today. But anyway, the question below: every generation has different economic challenges and opportunities. How is the job market different for you compared to your parents? Okay, so for this first approach to paraphrasing, we have to kind of take a look at, okay, well, what are the key words that we might need to use in our response to this question, right? We're focusing on the job market, right? And we're focusing on how that might be different from, for me or my generation compared to my parents' generation, right? So I think that job market is a key concept there that we would probably, if we're going to respond to this question, want to replace. We don't want to use the word or phrase job market in our response. So what are some possibilities here? I'll give you a second. If you want to think about what might be a suitable replacement or a synonym for a word like job or the whole phrase job market. Got an idea, please don't come off of mute. I said that at the beginning of the lesson. But in the chat, if you've got an idea, what could go there? What might be a suitable replacement there? Okay, I'll give you a second. Aha, Pranav, thank you. Profession, yeah. So a job, a good synonym of job is profession, good. I see employment opportunities. I see workplace. Yeah, okay, so we're getting some ideas here about some replacements. So job market, that is kind of the job market is like the employment scene at a particular time. It is whether or not jobs there are many jobs to be had, but also like what kinds of jobs are available to people. And so all of these ideas about career and employment opportunities and marketplace for jobs, yes, that is all really good stuff that we could use in a sample response to this question. So good. In fact, some of you identified the thing that I thought would make a good replacement here, right? So this here, down below is a sample response that would work really well here. So if I'm answering this question, I want to focus on that keyword job market and then come up with a good replacement. And a sample response, a direct response to this question could be something like, well, yes, I believe certain employment trends are quite different compared to my parents' generation, okay? And then of course, in a good IELTS speaking response, I would provide some detail to explain what I mean here. But as a direct response to this question, employment trends, certain, let me look, I'm gonna go back here. Employment opportunities, I like that. So those of you who responded in the chat with employment opportunities, that concept would really nicely replace the idea that we have, okay? So what they're looking for here is your ability to paraphrase the ideas with different language that doesn't significantly change the idea very much from the original question, but just simply restates it in a different way. And here, this example and much of the language that all of you provided here in the chat would work really, really well as a replacement. Okay, so like I said, this is the simplest strategy. This strategy is one that I'm guessing most of you are familiar with. Let's try it here. We don't need to probably talk about it too much more. Imagine I'm your interviewer, okay? Take a second. So I'm gonna ask you quickly the question, do you think it's better to be an only child or to have brothers and sisters? Respond to this question to yourself. Don't unmute yourself, but respond to it. And what would you replace? I think that key word there is an only child, okay? Or brothers and sisters is kind of another key concept there. If you were going to respond to this question, think about it for a second. What would you respond? How would you respond to it? Replacing that keyword with a synonym. Okay. Does So I see some comments coming in. That's fantastic. I'll give you another second here, another couple of seconds here. Take a look. What would be a suitable replacement here? Good. Okay, I'm seeing some stuff come in. Yeah, many of you identified the word sibling would be really, really good here, and I 100% agree. I see a full sentence here in response. Pranav, you said, "I believe it's amazing to have a sibling." That's great. Okay, so if the question's asking you, what's better, to be an only child or to have sibling, that response would be a very appropriate response, indicating your perspective that having a sibling is a little bit better. So actually, for you, Pranav, it sounds like it'd be a lot better. It's amazing to have a sibling. Yeah. So that is great. You did not recycle any language from the question. You replaced the key word with another phrase, another word, and that is your paraphrased response to the question. Great. Let me take another look at the chat here. Yes, nurturing with siblings. Nurturing with siblings is good. It would be grammatical there. Nurturing with siblings is good. Nurturing is a good word there. It's a nice advanced word. I would probably, nurturing kind of means that you provide the environment for something to grow. You support it. And so that nurturing might not be the closest paraphrase that we want there, but you could use a passive phrase there, something like being raised with siblings is my preference. Something like that would be a good replacement there. So good job. Being single, good. I'm taking a look here. I'm looking at my screen. Yeah, having siblings is a good replacement for that phrase. Let me see what folks over on YouTube are saying. Having siblings to play with and have fun is definitely better than being by yourself. That's a nice, that's great. Good response. I'll repeat that one. Having siblings to play with and have fun is definitely better than being all by yourself. That's a nice paraphrase to this question. Okay. You get the idea. My response looked a lot like yours. Very simple. I would very much prefer to have siblings. Okay, so this is all we need. We did not. You don't need to go further than this sample sentence that's down below. You don't need necessarily to paraphrase all of the concepts from the question. The question simply asks for your preference, and you can respond very directly to this speaking question. Yeah, I would actually very much prefer to have siblings, and that is a good enough response for your direct sentence response to this question. And then again, you'd want to explain it a little bit more in detail after that for a good response, but this is the place where you would do your paraphrasing for this one. Okay, all right, good. All right, a nice easy start here. This is great. So I think this concept is pretty clear here. Let's move on to approach number 2. All right, there we go. All right, approach number 2 involves verbs, verbs and subjects. All right, now we're going to get into some ways that you're probably also familiar with, but I want to focus on this because we want to now move beyond the simple approach of simply replacing words with synonyms. That's part of the challenge, and you should do that. But another thing that you can try to do as you are thinking about paraphrasing is to take the question that was asked of you, and especially there are often opportunities to take a verb form of a word in the question and make it your subject of the sentence. That is often a possibility. Now you have to do some thinking with this, and this may not be automatic enough for you at this point to be able to do quickly in your speaking responses, or it may be, and that's good. If it's not, if you feel like this may be challenging to do, start with writing. This would be a good place to writing gives you a little more time to think about your sentences and how you're doing things. Okay, I also want to add, everything I'm talking about here today, all of these approaches, they don't always work, right? So we're not always going to have verbs that we can mix around and make into our subjects of the sentence, but sometimes it's a possibility. And so it's something that we can look at and think about as a strategy when we're trying to paraphrase. Okay, so let's take a look here. Here we've got a simple example that I'm going to provide. Do your parents influence your day-to-day decisions a lot these days? Why or why not? Okay, let's imagine this is a speaking question. Well, influence, okay, is an interesting word because it can be used without any changes as a noun, okay, and it could be the subject of your sentence, and it could also be your verb, and it doesn't require any changes, okay? So I can say a sentence, the influence of blah, 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 blah is dramatic, right? That influence there can be used as a noun and used as a verb. So in theory, we could take this verb and simply apply it to a different subject in our response and use it in our subject, and it would be a form of paraphrasing. Okay, so I chose this example because this is kind of an easy word to do this with. We'll get to some more challenging stuff in a moment here, but here's an example about how that could look. Okay, my parents' influence is not very strong these days. Okay, I'm older. I'll speak for myself. I'm in my 40s, and I ask my parents for advice sometimes, but I'm not on my daily in my daily life. I'm not asking them for lots of tips on how to do this or that thing, right? So now I've recycled this word in a way. Maybe we'd want to replace this word if a word comes to you quickly, that would be a good synonym. So if we could apply both approach number 1 and number 2 here, that would be possibly even better. And we're going to talk about that more throughout the lesson, that we want to be combining all of these approaches as much as possible. But for the sake of just taking a look at the concept here, I just want to show you that in this case, we can take this verb from the original sentence and use it in a different way in our response. And that by itself will be rewarded by your IELTS graders. They're going to notice that you were able to recognize that this verb can be used as a noun. And here in this noun phrase, we have the subject influence, my parents' influence. And that is something that would be rewarded, especially in your ability to recognize grammar and use this in a way. Okay, so that's an example here where we can take this and put it in a different spot. Okay, another way that is often possible to take verbs from the original question and to pull them into your subject position in a sentence. Now we're getting into some more grammar that you've probably studied before, but this might be review for some of you, is that you can take a verb and many times you can use it in what's called a gerund form. Okay, so a gerund is when you take a verb and you put ing on the end and slide it over to the subject position of your sentence. Again, this doesn't always work with all verbs, but this is a concept that you've probably studied before that you should review for paraphrasing, because it can be especially useful for paraphrasing. Here's an example of how that looks for this sentence. Okay, so here's a sample speaking question. How often do you see your extended family? Okay, so aunts, uncles, cousins, whatever. Okay, so if I want to paraphrase a response and use this verb see, I can say something like this. Unfortunately, seeing my family happens less frequently than I would like. Okay, so again, maybe you've quickly thought of a replacement word for see, and you could use that in a gerund form in the beginning of your sentence. That might be even better, but you don't have to do that. If the IELTS graders see that you could take this verb see and you recognize that you could grammatically apply this as the subject of your sentence by making it a gerund form, seeing, then that would also be highly rewarded in your paraphrasing sort of score that they give you, your ability to paraphrase. So that is another very, very useful way of replacing, using verbs in the original question sentence and putting them in a different spot in your target sentence, in your response, and showing off your grammar ability there. Okay? So another approach here, an especially useful one. You may need to practice this, especially for speaking. You may need to review, and if we need to, we can talk about some places you can go to get some advice on some of these things if they're unfamiliar, okay? But like we did before, let's practice this a little bit. So here's a question, sample speaking question, I'd like for you to think about, and go ahead and put your responses in the chat, okay? So let's imagine your interviewer asked you something like, do you prefer to watch movies in a theater or at home? Now, there are different ways you could paraphrase this question, and go ahead, whatever comes to mind is fine, but I'd love to see some examples where people are taking this verb and pulling it over to your subject position of the sentence, especially probably using that gerund strategy we just talked about. Okay, so I'm going to be quiet for a second. Why don't you go ahead and give that a try? Okay, see if you can come up with a sentence, and whatever you come up with, go ahead and put it in the chat and we'll take a look. I'll pull out some sample responses. Okay, so take a few seconds. I'll be quiet. Okay, I'm seeing some good stuff come in. I'll give it a little more time. Go ahead and put your stuff in there, your response. Okay, so I see a bunch of responses in there. Let me put these up here. On my screen, I'm not sure what's visible to all of you. I'm putting the chat on my screen. Is that shared with all of you? Could you, somebody respond in the chat? Can you see the chat responses in the chat if I put them there? I'm not sure you can. Oh, thumbs up. Okay. Yes. Okay, good. All right. So these are public responses here. That's good. Oops, sorry, wrong thing. So some good responses. Oh shoot. Oh no. Oh no. Oh shoot. There we go. All right. So some good responses here. Let me scroll back up. Oh, all right. I'm looking at Pranav's in the middle. I find watching films in cinema more appealing than at home. Great. Okay. Watching movies at home is one of my favorite entertainment. Okay, we would say watching movies at home is one of my favorite forms of entertainment. We would need to add that forms in there, but good sentence otherwise. And your gerund is really nice. Watching films is better in the comfort of my home. Watching films is better, and you wouldn't want that is more better at the end. All you need is watching films is better in the comfort of my home. Nice, nice, good. Watching movies in a theater with friends is a great time. We would say watching movies in a theater with a friend is a great time on the weekend. Okay, good. All right, really strong. Another one, watching a movie in a theater is mostly preferred by me. Okay, good. That's good. The passive voice there at the end is perfectly fine. All right, nice job. Nice job. You get the idea. This is something you should practice, and especially as you are, if this is not something that's quick for you to formulate in speaking, work on it in your writing responses. Take a look at those verbs. See if you can pull them over to be gerund subjects, or that you could replace the subject in a different way with the verbs of your sentence. That is a really nice approach to mixing up your paraphrasing strategies. And remember, if the more mixing you do, the more mixture of your approaches that you do, the higher, especially grammatical grammar score you will receive. They're really looking for you to mix around your grammar as much as possible. That is something they call out specifically on the IELTS writing and speaking rubrics that they provide, the band score descriptors. And so this is one way to kind of do that kind of thing. Okay, so good. Nice job. Nice job. Let's keep moving. We've got 3 more approaches and we're moving right along. Let's look at the approach number 3. This one is related to what we just talked about, but I wanted to separate it from the verb subject thing because that's a very specific thing where often you can apply that gerund strategy, but we can apply this approach to other words as well, of course, and this is something that is, again, very highly rewarded in your grammatical score, especially your ability to mix your grammar structures in your responses, okay? And that's something they're, of course, looking for. So let's take a look at this one here as a sample. What we're talking about here is taking keywords from the question and trying to use them very explicitly in a different form in your response, okay? So using the same word, but maybe it is in an adjective form in the question, and you want to use it in an adverb form or a noun form in your response. You know from studying grammar that many words have different formations in English, right? So a word like play, right? So it can be used as a noun and a verb, but it will have a different form like playful, which is an adjective. You could say a sentence something like, the kitten is very playful, right? And that playful is an adjective form of the word play. You want to make an adverb out of that, you add an ly on the end of playful, and you have playfully, right? And so that's what we're talking about, where we're thinking about changing the parts of speech of key words. Okay, so that is another excellent thing to do to show off your grammar and vocabulary knowledge and to really help your paraphrasing score. So let's take a look at this question here to give an example of what we're talking about. More and more companies allow their employees to work from home or remotely rather than going into an office each day, right? So if I'm going to respond, okay, and then this is a writing question. Do the advantage of this policy outweigh the disadvantages? Okay, in my introduction, I probably want to paraphrase the key word there, remotely, working remotely, right? And remotely, we would notice is an adverb form. That ly at the end gives us that idea, right? So we work remotely. It gives us the sense of how we work, okay? So as opposed to in an office. If I wanted, though, to paraphrase remotely and recycle that word, but show off my grammar ability by using it in a different form in my response, that would be a really good idea and something that would be rewarded in your score as a really good paraphrase, okay? So let's take a look at that. How could we do that? What would happen if we are going to take that keyword remotely and put it in a different form? All right, so if I want to do that, one way to do that would be to change this to actually an adjective here. And I'm taking my phrase work and I'm taking my word work here. Now, maybe I could find a different word for that. We talked about that earlier in the lesson. Maybe I could improve my paraphrasing here by replacing that word entirely. But here we're focusing on this other separate skill of switching out parts of speech. So if I want to do that, I can make this an adjective and I can use it to describe work, okay? The kind of work that we're talking about here. Okay, now In some ways, this is easier than other kinds of paraphrasing because I don't need to fully replace the word with a synonym. Sometimes that's harder. And you should feel confident. If this is the way that you can think of quickly to paraphrase working remotely in a response, that's great. Be confident about that. You don't necessarily need to replace the word, especially if you are able to use it in a different form in your response. IELTS will reward that skill that you have to do that kind of thing. Okay, so look for those opportunities, all right? If you can think quickly of a synonym to replace this word, maybe that's better. Again, we can mix these strategies, and that's good, and that's encouraged. But if you need to, this is a perfectly acceptable and highly rewarded way to do your paraphrasing. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I want to see what you can do here. Here's a question. Education from preschool through university should be paid for by the government and therefore free to students. Okay, a sample task 2 writing question here. Okay, all right, now paid is a verb, paid for, and what my challenge for you is to think, how could you respond to this question in a way that you keep this word pay? Okay, the base of this word is to pay for something. It's just the past tense, right? But you change the part of speech. So you replace it. It's no longer a verb. Maybe you could use a different form of this word in a response. I want to give you a little bit of time to think about that and see if you're aware of some of the different forms of this word and how you might be able to apply it. So take a second. Any paraphrase is fine. If something else comes to mind, I don't care. Put it in the chat. That's fine. But I'd love to see some folks out there able to use a different grammatical form of this word in your paraphrase as we're practicing this strategy. Okay, so I'll be quiet for a second. Go ahead and think about it. And whatever you come up with, put your response in the chat. I'd love to see what you say. Good. Seen some good stuff come through. Give you a little more time. And I'm seeing some good questions come in from YouTube as well. So I want to take a look at that. Give you a couple more seconds here in case there's somebody who wants to write. Okay. All right. I'm seeing some good stuff. I'm seeing some good stuff here. Let me move things around on my screen so I can easily look at your chat. I'm going to scroll back up here. Okay, so several folks identified that we can use a noun form of this word pay, the verb pay, and change it into payment, right? So payment for education should be done by the government would be a very good way of showing off your knowledge that you can use a different form. Yeah, payment for, you could say payment for education, or payment for school from kindergarten through university, or whatever the names for primary education are where you live would be acceptable. Those would be good things to say, but using that word pay, now we're also, of course, if we change to a noun form, we are using approach number 2 as well, in a way, right? We are taking this verb and putting it in the subject of our sentence, and that's another thing that would be rewarded by IELTS graders, that noticing that you have the grammar awareness to be able to take that word and plug it in to the correct spot in a sentence. That is fantastic. And it's a mixture of some of the things that we're talking about. I see some other examples here. Let me see. Education payments should be supported by the government. Good. Oh, all right. Someone used approach number one. Fees for education should be cleared, or I'd probably use a different verb there, Amitabh. I'd probably use fees should be covered by the government. That would be a good one there. Yeah, good. Looking down through a few more responses on my screen here. I agree that the cost of education should be tuition free for students and covered by the government. Yeah, that's really good. And yeah, we're seeing some approach number ones come in on the chat, and I love some of these. Education should be government sponsored. Wow, that is a nice one. Now, it doesn't use this approach number three, but that's okay. That's a really nice paraphrase there. Good. Okay, I love it. Okay, I am noticing also a really good question in YouTube from a YouTube user out there. Thank you for putting this question in. Let me see who you are. 1 second. I'm gonna give credit here. Mel English. Yeah, thanks for your question. The question that came in from YouTube is replacing synonyms for work. And this was in the earlier example that we had. And this is a good question and a good point that we can discuss here. Is replacing synonyms for work in remote work, is that going to sound artificial? Okay, that's a really, really, really good question. Yes, sometimes we need to be really careful that some of the things some of the paraphrasing we do doesn't sound artificial. And what that means is that what generally happens when things sound artificial, in my experience with working with students, is that students actually don't select the most appropriate word for the sentence that they're trying to paraphrase. And so it sounds artificial because the word, the language used is not, doesn't sound natural. It doesn't sound like something a native speaker would necessarily say. And that is, there are other ways in which things could sound artificial, but that is often the case. So one of the things that's worth mentioning here, and I'm really glad for that comment, is that when you're paraphrasing, you should make attempts to use language that you feel very confident about and that you've used and that you know the meaning of and how to use well. Now, you can't always do that. And it's not necessarily important that all of your responses sound 100% natural. That is a goal that's probably not attainable for most people. And IELTS knows that. And in all sections of the test, they don't expect perfection to get really good scores. Most students need to get somewhere in a 7, or their goal is to get in the 8 range as a really high score. And if you look at the criteria for all of those levels, there's no expectation for perfection with vocabulary and grammar. Now, there is expectation that what you're saying is at those higher levels is able to be clearly understood, and that the majority of your language that you use would sound natural in an English to an English speaker, okay? And it's not difficult to understand what you're trying to say. So my encouragement for you is to, of course, continue to study vocabulary and grammar and build your knowledge, use your English as much as you can, and to the best extent possible, use words that you're pretty familiar with, and don't try to use fancy words that you think might fit, but maybe don't fit. You don't want to make a lot of guesses on the IELTS speaking and writing test. You want to use language that you're pretty familiar with because if you're using words that don't quite fit or that you're not really very familiar with, you're going to make mistakes that will be noticeable to the grader. So that's a great question, and I hope that answer is useful to not only you who asked it, but to everybody else here who's watching. So good question. All right, so let's, I'm going too fast. Let's go to one more here, and this one we're starting to get a little more complicated with some of our approaches, especially with the grammar. Something you can do to paraphrase well is to start playing around with clauses, mixing up phrases and clauses in your sentences. Now, I have to mention, I've noticed that folks here today in your responses are already doing this kind of thing in many ways, and that's fantastic. And this is something I would say this approach tends to be one of the more complicated ones. And if you are able to do it really well, that is really nicely rewarded in your score. So this is something to think about. But what we're talking about here is not just replacing words, but taking whole phrases and even clauses, right? A clause is going to have a full subject and verb. Now we have, as you probably know, we can't get into this too much, but there are different types of clauses, right? A sentence is a clause when it can stand all by itself, but there are other types of clauses that are considered subordinate or not really complete sentences because they have things like, subordinating conjunctions, like words like that, or things like whereas or while, or other words that kind of allow you to present a full clause, but then you need to usually put a comma and then add another clause to it. Those are complicated sentences, structures that IELTS likes to see you able to employ. I would love to be able, I personally really love grammar, so I would love to talk about this more, but we can't get into all of that, those grammar structures today. If you need some ideas on studying some of the more complicated grammar structures, go back and take a look at if you've got resources on things like noun clauses, adverb clauses, adjective clauses, those things that you maybe some of you out there haven't studied since early on in your English studies. Those are good things to review as ways of developing your skill to mix around different types of phrases and clauses. Okay, but I want to take a look at this as an example. And again, at the end, I can suggest some resources. If you need some grammar help to review some of this stuff, I can certainly provide some of that, okay? But let's take a look here. So feedback and evaluation are necessary aspects of school and work, but many people dislike being evaluated. What are the causes of this problem? How could it be solved? Okay, so here we've got a nice little task 2 question, all right? And we've got, it's a complex sentence. We've got this first clause here, feedback and evaluation are necessary, right? And then we've got this conjunction here, and then we've got another clause here, but people dislike being evaluated. So we've got this sentence with 2 clauses here that we can take a look at. And the challenge here, and I do this in a simple way first, and then we'll look at a more complicated paraphrasing strategy second, but just to demonstrate the concept here, one thing you could do that would be rewarded for your paraphrasing, for what they're looking for with your paraphrasing, would be to take the language from both sides of this sentence and see if you could combine it in some way or mix it together in a brand new sentence structure that doesn't repeat the general structure of the original question. Okay, so let's take a look at an example here. All right. Sample response. While being evaluated may be necessary at school and work, comma, it can certainly be very unpleasant, and then maybe you'd want to continue that sentence on there. Okay, what I wanted to show here. Now, I did not do enough work here necessarily to replace these words. We could probably replace both of these words here, evaluate and necessary. Okay, but just to exemplify the concept here a little bit. What we did here was to take our concept from part 2 of the sentence and combine it with one of the concepts from the first part of the question. And then I'm using this while here. I'm using a new sentence structure to introduce a complex sentence, okay? And here we've got 2 clauses in my response. This is going to be a nice, beautiful, complicated sentence with a different sentence structure than the original question, okay? The thing that would not be rewarded here, that would be really counted negatively, is if you used the exact same structure as the original question and you didn't replace any of the words. But here we are at least mixing up the concepts from the 2 parts of the question into a new sentence pattern. Okay, that's a good thing to do and a good thing to try to focus on as you're trying to create your own paraphrased sentences. All right, but as I suggested a second ago, I think we could improve this one even more, right? Because in the original question, we had the word evaluate. Now, I did do a good thing here, which was here we've got a noun form, evaluation, and here we've changed that part of speech. So I guess I've done an okay job here of changing the part of speech following approach number 3. So, okay, maybe we're in good shape here. We don't need to do anything more. But how about with this word necessary? Okay, we could get some synonyms here maybe and make my mixed clause structure sentence even stronger, right? So you could think for a second, what's a good replacement synonym of the word necessary, right? Okay, so how about this? What did I do? There we go. Even better sentence here down below. While evaluation may be required of students and employees, it can certainly be very unpleasant. Okay, so, oh boy, I guess I did a good job here with this one. I guess if you're counting this evaluated from up top, I put it in noun form. I guess I didn't notice that in my comments earlier. Sorry. We already had 2 forms of the word evaluated in the question. We have evaluated and evaluation. So, okay. Maybe we could think about this first evaluation a little bit more. I didn't notice that. But here, we've got a synonym of necessary, and we're replacing that with required, okay? And I went on to replace a couple of other words, students and employees, instead of school and work, okay? Yeah, and I'm seeing some other folks responding here as well with some idea. Needed, required, tuition bills should be footed by the government, okay? I see being assessed is not employed by people, even if it's an important aspect of school and office life. Okay, good. Yeah, good. Yeah, so I'm seeing some good stuff here. The challenge here with this one is to take these complicated structures and see if you can mix them up. See what you can do to get a new sentence pattern and replacing not just single words, but whole phrases or whole clauses in your sentences into new ways. IELTS loves to see that, and they will reward that kind of thing with your score, okay? So, as we've done all day here, let's practice this a little bit. Oh no, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't build a practice. Well, we got some practice with this one. I forgot to put a practice problem in here. I apologize for that. That was a mistake. All right, you get the idea here. This one is complicated, but certainly something to focus on. Okay, so think about where we've come so far from approaches 1 to 4. We have looked at different strategies so far, ranging from simply replacing single words all the way up to mixing around our grammar structures so that we can formulate very different sentences, all right? And so approach number 5 is actually one that is going to encourage you to do, I think, all of these things as much as possible and whenever possible to respond in ways that simply build on the concept from the question with your own newly created sentence structure and pattern, okay? So this, I think, is the ideal. where you can break free. So somebody who has, let's say, somewhat limited language abilities, okay? So somebody who is maybe lower, whatever, intermediate, or they're a beginner student. If you think back to the time when you were first beginning to learn English, right? You probably remember from your textbooks and your practice in classes with your teacher that your teacher would ask you a question and that your response would borrow most of the language from that question and simply change around maybe one little bit of grammar in there, or you would replace some pronouns in there or something like that. That would be something that's very appropriate for beginning students to work on because you're trying to master very specific skills. But now we've sort of looked at that from approach number one, where we're just kind of taking the original sentence from the question and we're thinking about, can we replace a word or two? We've moved beyond that to points in approaches 2 and 3, where we're then trying to take words from the question and not only replace them with synonyms, but then think about the grammar changes we could make. And then point number 4 is the more complicated version of that, where we're not just thinking about parts of speech and changing around whether or not we're using a noun or a verb form of a word, but now we're thinking about, okay, can I mix up this sentence in a dramatic way so that it's clear I've mastered some of these more complicated grammatical structures? The ideal approach is to combine all of them. And what that ends up being is where you can kind of forget the original structure of the question that was asked, and you can build a new sentence in your response from scratch. Okay, so that you're not repeating things that were mentioned in the original question to them as much as possible. That is where you're getting to the more complicated and most highly rewarded form of paraphrasing by IELTS. Okay, and so we can see some sample responses here to this question. So let's just look at the question first before we look at those. Some possessions have tremendous personal value. What factors make an object personally valuable? Okay, so if I want to answer this, I should not necessarily feel that I need to borrow any of the language from this question, right? You have the freedom, if you can think of the words where you can go and respond without even recycling a single piece of this original thing, right? So some ways to do that. Things acquire worth when there are nice memories attached to them. Okay, acquiring worth. Objects become important when, and you can give your rationale why. Things take on sentimental value when, and you can explain when they take on sentimental value. Here, I'm not really focused on the target question structure or the language at all, except that I'm just simply trying to answer the question using my own sentence, my own words that I came up with from scratch. So this is your goal. If you are at a place where you are dependent on the question to give you much of the structure, you should try in your practice, as you're practicing speaking and practicing writing, where your direct responses to the question do not, as much as possible, borrow any of the language from the original question. This is hard to do. This is not necessarily a skill that's easy to define because it requires a combination of all of the kinds of things that we've been talking about today. But I want to present it as an approach because it should be, I think, your goal. Your goal should be to be able to do this kind of thing without having to borrow language from the original question as much as you possibly can. Now, don't worry. If you're having trouble doing that, and if you are going to rely on the strategies that we learned about approaches 1 to 4 in your IELTS when you take the test, do that. That is going to be good for your score because it will be noticed by the graders and rewarded. But just want to encourage you to have a lofty and difficult goal on the horizon for you that eventually you could respond to questions in a way that don't really borrow structure or language very much at all from the original question, okay? And judging from the responses that I've seen in the chat today from you here on the Zoom call and those of you out there on YouTube, I don't think this is so unrealistic in many cases. And I think probably there might be some sentences you'll need to paraphrase in your interviews and in your writing that you might need to rely on just simple replacement and some of the grammar strategies we talked about. But I'm guessing there might be other opportunities for you to really show off that you can create new and sentences from scratch. Okay, so that's my encouragement for you to continue working on all of this. Okay, let's now take some questions. I've got some time here at the end. Happy to take your questions. And now I've been, sometimes I have someone who's helping me out, who is kind of giving me questions, forwarding some of the questions to me, especially from folks on YouTube out there. While I'm teaching, but she's not online today. So I probably missed some questions that came through the chat earlier in the lesson. So if you've got a question for me about, especially about paraphrasing, I'd like to prioritize questions about paraphrasing here. I'd love to answer a few questions that you have, or give you some advice if I can clarify anything, or if there's additional information you'd like, maybe I can point you in the right direction. So let's use the last couple of minutes for that. And if nobody has questions, that's fine. We can end the session early, but I'd love to give an opportunity for that. All right. So let's take a look. I see. All right. Okay. So do we have? So a question that came in from YouTube. Do we have a book or a good resource about paraphrasing exercises or templates? I don't have one to recommend necessarily that's directly about paraphrasing. I think your best bet will be to consult. If so, in particular, so the question that came in from Mel, thank you, on YouTube was especially about the number 4, about clause structures and the more complicated mixing of phrases and clauses. There, I've recommended in the past, and I think I actually saw this. I think we actually saw this in the comments that came in on YouTube. Yes, Mel, and in fact, Mel, you called this out. I often recommend, and have recommended in past classes, that Betty Azar book for grammar, and that's for self-study. Okay, so I think the best, if you're worried about your grammar, the best thing is to, if you can sign up for a grammar class, get in with somebody who can help, who's very knowledgeable about English grammar, and not only English grammar, but also the issues that English language learners confront when they are learning English grammar. If you can get paired with somebody or take a class on that, and if you have time to do so before your IELTS, I think it's a really good idea. There's no replacement for having somebody to give you that immediate feedback on your grammar and any mistakes or challenges you might be facing. But if you are somebody who is like many of Magoosh students and many of you out there, then you're probably having to study grammar on your own. And for that, I have always recommended the Betty Azar books. I'll put that in the chat again. I know my Magoosh students here on the Zoom call have probably heard me talk about this, but the advanced grammar book from the Azar series is one that I often recommend because it has really good descriptions of advanced grammar, and they have lots and lots and lots of practice exercises, which will be the kinds of practice exercises you could focus on to work on these paraphrasing skills that I talked about, especially related to number 4. Okay, so look for the Betty Azar book. It's the blue one. There are 3 versions of the Betty Azar grammar books. You can find them. I don't know, people are all over the world on this lesson and on this call, but I would use Amazon to find those books. There are 3 versions. There's a blue version, there's a red version, and a black version in that series. And you want the blue version is the most advanced. Excuse me. Talking too much. The blue version is the most advanced, and that's going to be the most helpful for most of you who are watching here today. Okay. I'm sorry. I had a little illness go through my family this week, and I've caught it a little bit. My voice is, you can probably hear, my voice is not keeping up with me here this hour. A good question here. So is it a good approach to paraphrase the reading materials for practice? Yeah, that can be. Any materials you have where you can take sentences and try to put them in your own words, that's good. I wouldn't recommend that necessarily as a way to improve your reading score for IELTS reading, because I think these paraphrasing skills we're talking about are ones you would focus on to develop your own paraphrased sentences. For the reading and listening sections, they're measuring your ability to recognize paraphrases, and that largely becomes a vocabulary exercise. So if you are struggling to recognize paraphrases in the reading and listening sections between the questions and the passages, I would not necessarily focus on what we've been talking about today in this lesson. I would more so prioritize vocabulary study, which, if you know me well, is something that I recommend to absolutely everybody who is studying for IELTS, that you focus on vocabulary study regularly as you study. So that would be my recommendation here. All right. Is there any site where we can get word replacements, especially for IELTS words? Yeah, especially for IELTS words. That's an interesting addition to your question there. I don't know of a site that provides a lot of synonyms specifically for IELTS words. I'd have to, maybe one exists. If anybody out there has come across one, I'd love to hear. Go ahead and pop a link into the chat. That'd be wonderful. But I'm not aware of that. I like to use simple, dictionary websites, dictionary.com, and some of these other ones that provide synonyms. You can also, all of them have an online thesaurus, which is probably a word you're familiar with, but that is going to give you suggestions. The problem that students face with finding replacement words is that you can't always be certain that the sense of the word is exactly the same as what you are attempting to use. And there's no easy fix for that other than to get some feedback from somebody who knows English really well, or a native speaker sometimes, okay? And so, it's a challenging thing. But again, it comes back to studying vocabulary, and studying vocabulary in a very systematic way. And if you are studying vocabulary in a systematic way, that probably means you are keeping track of new words somewhere, like in a journal or something like that. And so as you're working on paraphrasing, as you're working on practicing speaking and writing questions, the words that you are struggling to paraphrase from your writing and from your speaking responses, your practice responses, those are perfect things to add, to do some research about, to go look up in these online thesauruses. Again, dictionary or websters.com has a good, very solid thesaurus and dictionary. That's part of your research, to go in and see if you can find some replacement words to help you. And then, if possible, you can try to get some feedback from someone who knows English, maybe a little better than you do, or a native speaker if you're really uncertain about the usage. It's always so challenging to study another language when you're self-studying, which I know many of you are. That's one of the core challenges. And so, if you can find that kind of resource, that is going to be a useful thing if you're really struggling with finding replacement words and synonyms that are appropriate. Okay. Good.
Hi, sir, I have a question.
Oh, Isaac, could you put it in the chat? I'd prefer.
Oh, here.
Yeah, for the live classes, I prefer we do things in the chat just because it becomes challenging with the microphones and everything. Okay, so sorry about that. But if you could put it in the chat, I'll be happy to answer your question. Okay. Good. Looking through. All right, I've seen some general questions come in from those of you on the Zoom students. Let me take a look back here. Okay. Oh, Isaac, I see. Can you please send the link again about booking the test? Okay, sure. I can do that at the end here. Just hang on about that. Because I'll have to look that up for you here. But just hang on, Isaac. I see your question there. Okay, some general questions I see from Bose. For the writing test, which method should be best to use between paper and computer-based? Okay, so a general question. We're getting a little bit away from paraphrasing, but that's okay because I want to get to your questions here, especially those of you on the Zoom call. So that's a mixed answer that we'll provide. So for the writing test in particular, if you are somebody who types faster than you write by hand, or if your handwriting is not very clear, then I would strongly recommend considering the writing test, especially if the the computer-based test, especially if the writing score is something you're concerned about. Okay, so if you need to prioritize writing, and if you are struggling to write a full response, in particular in the full amount of time, either on the computer or the paper-based version. Some people write faster by hand. I'll tell you that I type much faster than I write by hand. So whichever side is going to be a little faster for you is going to give you an advantage, okay? And also, another consideration about the computer-based test for writing that I think can be really important for some people is that on the computer-based test, you can edit things and delete and move things around so much easier than you can on the paper-based. On the paper-based, you've got to have a pencil and you've got to erase stuff. And maybe the thing you erased, you have to rewrite later on down further in a different place in your essay. Or maybe you decided to change your thesis statement at the very end because it doesn't match your body paragraphs. Well, on the paper-based exam, you have to do erasing and replacing. On the computer-based test, you can simply, like on any computer, delete it and retype it or move it around or do what you need to do. Okay, so in that way, the computer-based test can be more efficient for some folks. Okay, it's hard for me to give a general prescription, but I do think that those, otherwise the questions are the same. It's not that one is going to be more difficult necessarily than the other, but if any of those considerations are important to you, then that could be a good reason to take one version of the test over the other. Okay, so that would be my advice about the writing test. Good. All right. Well, we are overtime today, and I see there are a couple of things that came in. Isaac, I saw your question about the link to the test. I think I'm just gonna. I can reach you through our system here at Magoo, so I can send you a link after we close out the lesson here today. But we're out of time here. I do need to end things today, and I really want to thank all of you, my Magoo students here on the Zoom call, and then also all of you out there on YouTube as well for tuning in, participating. I hope these classes, you found it useful. Just to let you know, for Magoo students here, tomorrow we have another conversation club at the same time, so 9 a.m. Pacific time. And then next week we'll have a full schedule of classes every day, Monday to Friday. We'll have either conversation club on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or we'll have 2 more of these classes. And so any of you out there on YouTube, on Tuesday and Thursday next week, we'll be streaming live again. So you can look in on what we're up to here with these classes here at Magoosh. So anyway, thank you all. I hope you found this all useful, and we will see you in the next lessons coming up. Okay, so bye everybody. thanks again for all your participation here today.
Bye.
Bye.